In today's class, we'll assess the environment that nonprofit and public organizations operate in. In part 1 of the module, we'll look at stakeholder engagement and stakeholder analysis. And in part 2 of the module, we'll look at environmental analysis, and we'll look at several different types of analyses. We'll explore SWOT analysis, Porter's 5 forces analysis, and pest analysis. Finally, in this module, we'll examine what are critical success factors in organizational competencies. According to Bryson, environmental assessment is a good place to engage in stakeholder analysis. However, this is not necessarily a good place to start or begin the strategic planning process. Although stakeholder feedback can definitely be useful, beginning the strategic planning process with stakeholder analysis can take you away from your overall purpose and lead you to focus on more secondary and tertiary concerns. There are a number of commonly used methods to assess an organization's environment, and in this module, we'll focus on 3: the SWOT analysis, the pest analysis, and Porter's 5 forces analysis. A SWOT analysis includes an internal analysis of an organization's strengths and weaknesses, as well as an analysis of external opportunities and threats facing the organization. Successful organizations are able to use their strengths to create strategies that take advantages of opportunities and minimize threats. A SWOT analysis tends to look like this, with 4 quadrants, each one indicating where the organization's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats lie. When trying to identify your organization's weaknesses, it's important that you remain realistic. Oftentimes, within organizations, just as with ourselves, we tend to like to highlight the positives, our strengths, and downplay our weaknesses or the negative aspects of our organizations or ourselves. Therefore, we have to be realistic in our view of what our organization actually looks like so that we can accurately identify our organization's weaknesses. Another method that's often used to assess the environment is Porter's 5 forces analysis. This analysis focuses on the competitive forces that might present opportunities and threats in an organization's external environment. The theory with Porter's 5 forces analysis is that as different from one another as industries might appear to be on the surface, the underlying drivers of profitability are the same. And the stronger these forces, the less profitable the organization will be. These forces include the threat of new entrants, the threat of substitutes, the threat of competitors, the bargaining power of customers, and the bargaining power of suppliers. Porter's 5 forces were created with a focus specifically on for-profit organizations, but in recent years, he's also been looking at how these forces can influence and are often influenced by nonprofit and government organizations. In addition to a SWOT analysis and Porter's 5 forces analysis, an organization may also want to conduct a pest analysis to identify a number of key environmental drivers of change that are likely to affect the organization. Pest is similar to SWOT in that the underlying factors are put into categories, but instead of focusing on an organization's strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities and threats, you're now focusing on factors that occur all in the external environment relating to political, economic, social, and technological conditions. In essence, SWOT analysis provides insights into an organization's internal and external environment, while Porter's 5 forces analysis and pest analysis provides insights into an organization's external environment. Now that we've gone over some concepts relating to environmental analysis, we'll now look at what stakeholder engagement is, and when stakeholder engagement will be useful in the strategic planning process. To understand stakeholder engagement, we first have to understand what a stakeholder even is. A stakeholder is any person, group, or organization that can place a claim on an organization's attention, resources, or output, or is affected by that output. There are many different types of ways to engage stakeholders in your strategic planning process. Engagement can be considered group action, involvement, group participation, commitment, consultation, participatory practice, intervention, intercession, or contribution. The key to success for public and nonprofit organizations and for the communities that these organizations serve is the satisfaction of key stakeholders. Not all stakeholders will have the same level of importance for our organizations, and we won't want to engage all stakeholders in the same types of ways. One way that we can evaluate just how crucial different stakeholders are is by doing some stakeholder analysis. And in particular, we'll cover two types of analyses. One is the power versus interest grid, and the second is the stakeholder influence map. A power versus interest grid is simply a 2x2 grid that plots stakeholders' interest and interest in a political sense, as opposed to simple inquisitiveness, against stakeholders' power to affect the issue at hand. You'll want to identify who are the organization's internal stakeholders and who are the organization's external stakeholders. You'll then want to assess how much power and interest each stakeholder group has with regard to your organization. Stakeholders that have high interest in your organization and low power over your organization's operations would be considered subjects. You'll want to keep the subjects satisfied. Stakeholder groups who have high interest and high power with regard to your organization are considered players. These are individuals and stakeholder groups that you will want to manage closely. Stakeholder groups that have little interest and little power with regard to your organization are considered stakeholders that are in the crowd. You don't really need to do much with those who are in the crowd except to monitor those individuals and stakeholders and to invest minimal effort in doing so. Stakeholder groups that have low interest and high power are considered the context setters. You'll want to keep the context setters informed. It's important to understand where different stakeholder groups lie with regard to power versus interest because you'll want to know how do you engage different types of stakeholders. If a certain stakeholder group has a high level of power over the organization, yet they have little to no interest in what the organization does, then it would be a major faux pas to send those individuals or stakeholder groups monthly or weekly meeting minutes with regard to the strategic planning process. You will not want to inundate these individuals' emails or mailboxes with information when they do not have a great deal of interest within or over the organization. A power versus interest grid may initially simply look like a grid of dots plotted onto a chart. However, when you take the stakeholder power versus interest grid and connect those dots to identify the relationships and connections between the different stakeholder groups, you then can develop a stakeholder influence map. If you look at the stakeholder influence map here, it appears as if we have a lot of context setters who are stakeholder groups that we need to keep informed, who have relationships with stakeholder groups who are considered subjects. These would be groups that we need to keep satisfied. Stakeholder mapping essentially allows your organization to identify relevant stakeholders, discover how those stakeholder groups are or should be concerned about what your organization has to tell them, and it also allows your organization to set priorities for your action plan and moving forward with the strategic plan. Once we've conducted our environmental analyses and we've analyzed our stakeholders, we can now begin to assess what are our organization's critical success factors and what are our organizational competencies. Environmental analysis, whether a SWOT analysis, a pest analysis, or Porter's 5 forces analysis, can help an organization to identify its critical success factors. Critical success factors are things that the organization must do or criteria that the organization must meet in order to be successful in the eyes of stakeholders, especially those stakeholders who are most concerned about operations in the external environment. Critical success factors have been defined as the limited number of areas in which results, if they are satisfactory, will ensure successful competitive performance for the organization. They are the few key areas where things must go right for the business to flourish. If results in these areas are not adequate, the organization's efforts for the period will be less than desired. They are areas of activity that should receive constant and careful attention from management. By identifying an organization's critical success factors, you can create a common point of reference to help you direct and measure the success of your strategies. As a common point of reference, critical success factors help everyone know exactly what's most important in the organization. This helps people perform their own work in the right context and to pull together toward the same overall goals. Critical success factors can best be understood through the use of an example. Consider a produce market, we'll call it Farm Fresh Market, whose mission is to become the #1 produce market in the area by selling the highest quality, freshest farm produce from farm to customer in under 24 hours on 75% of our range and with 98% customer satisfaction. Farm Fresh Market has a number of key goals. These are to increase market share locally, to achieve fresh supplies of farm to customer in 24 hours, to maintain an above average customer satisfaction rate, and to expand product range to attract more customers. In order to identify possible critical success factors, we have to examine the mission and the goals to see which areas of the business need attention so that these goals can be achieved. We can start by brainstorming what the critical success factors might be. These will be our candidate critical success factors. We've identified 5 items that are candidate critical success factors that will help us to achieve our 4 goals. To achieve our goal of increasing market share locally, there are 2 candidate CSFs. We can increase competitiveness versus other local stores, and/or we can attract new customers. To help us achieve farm fresh suppliers of farm to customer in 24 hours, our candidate CSF is to sustain successful relationships with local suppliers. To help us maintain an above average candidate customer satisfaction rate, our candidate CSF is to retain staff and keep up customer-focused training. And to help us expand our product range to attract more customers, our candidate CSF is to source new products locally. We have 5 items listed as candidate critical success factors that will help us to achieve our 4 goals. The first CSF that we identify here from the candidate list in order for our organization to be successful is the relationship that exists with local suppliers. This will be absolutely essential to ensure freshness and to find new products. Therefore, we take this candidate CSF and make it an actual CSF for our organization. We will absolutely need for this to happen in order for our organization to continue to operate effectively. Now remember that CSFs, or critical success factors, are the limited few areas that an organization must perform well in order to be successful. Not all candidate CSFs will be necessary in order for our organization to reach success. Therefore, we will want to limit our CSFs to those few that are absolutely necessary. We don't want to overwhelm individuals within the organization by focusing on too many CSFs. Another critical success factor that we can move from candidate lists to actual lists is the ability to attract new customers. Without new customers, the store will be unable to expand or increase its market share. Although there's no hard and fast rule on how many critical success factors your organization could have, it's useful to limit the number to 5 or fewer absolute essentials. This helps your CSFs have maximum impact, and it also gives good direction and prioritization to other elements of your organization. You don't want your CSFs becoming so overwhelming that individuals within the organization have difficulty focusing. Identifying critical success factors is an iterative process. The goals and critical success factors are intrinsically linked, and each will be refined as you develop them. Here are some summary steps that you can use to identify critical success factors for your organization. First, you'll want to establish your organization's mission and strategic goals. Second, for each strategic goal, ask yourself, what area of organizational activity is essential to achieve this goal? The answers to this question will be your candidate critical success factors. Third, evaluate the list of candidate critical success factors to find the absolute essential elements for achieving success. These will be your actual or absolute critical success factors. As you identify and evaluate candidate critical success factors, you may uncover some new strategic goals or more detailed objectives. So you may want to define your mission and goals iteratively. Fourth, identify how you will monitor and measure each of your critical success factors. 5, communicate your critical success factors along with other important elements of your organization's strategy. 6, keep monitoring and reevaluating your critical success factors to ensure that you're keeping progress toward your goals. Critical success factors will be less tangible than measurable objectives, but it is still useful to specify how you will be able to measure and monitor each of your critical success factors. In order to write good critical success factors, you'll need to have a good understanding of the environment that your organization operates in, the industry, as well as the internal workings of your particular organization. Finally, results of stakeholder analysis and environmental analysis should help your organization identify the competencies it can draw on or needs to develop in order to do well against the critical success factors. Competencies are the abilities, sets of actions, or strategies at which the organization is particularly good and that can be used to improve its performance in relation to the critical success factors. Competencies are the ability to do something well. Good facilities and stable resources in and of themselves are not competencies. These will be considered your assets. It's what you're able to do with your assets that will count or may count as your organization's competencies.